Welcome to Apprentice Marks. My name's John. Today, we're going to fix a busted end table. Let's get started. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you might recognize this end table as one of the ones that I built back in my very first video. If you haven't seen that video, check out the link in the description. Since I finished them about 3 months ago, these end tables have been in my living room. All was going real well until I was cleaning one day and noticed this great big crack down the center of this table. It looks like pieces of the laminate have begun to separate here, likely because one of them is shrinking. The maple trim on the outside seems to be holding the whole thing together, but we have to fix that crack. You'll also notice over here that this piece has some checking that's starting to crack as well. This is one of the downsides of working with pallet board as a material. It's not typically kiln dried and it's not usually very good quality. Now we've got a couple of options for fixing it. You might notice that there are imperfections in the tops of this table that have been filled with epoxy. These were nail holes or cracks or little knots in the wood. Again, it was kind of cheap wood that we used to do this project. I could just fill this whole gap with epoxy and see how long it lasts. My concern with that is that epoxy as a compound is going to get really hard. It's not terribly flexible, so it's not going to pull back and forth very well, which means that if this piece of wood continues to move, and I think that's entirely likely, then it's just going to crack again in not too long. The other problem with that approach is that it doesn't handle this crack up here, which is really only getting worse. So I think this piece at minimum has to be replaced, and I think if we're going to be replacing that piece, we may as well replace this one while we're at it. Now the problem with replacing these pieces is this edge banding. I've got this nice hard maple edge banding all the way around the perimeter of this thing, and it's mitered with 45-degree angles at the corners. In order to make sure that this glue up goes well, we have to do what we originally did with these pieces, which is to join either side with a planer or the joiner so that we have a nice flat edge for glue up. I think that means that we're going to have to rip this frame off. I really don't see any other way around it. Alright, so we've got the tabletop cut apart into the pieces that we're going to save. I gotta tell you, that was a real heartbreaker. I worked really hard on that laminate and it's a shame to see it all in pieces. This here was the rightmost side of the table, and we need to cut one piece to fit in between here. That was that piece that was just starting to crack but hadn't fully bit the bullet yet. And this spot here, we need two pieces in there. That piece there, those were the two that had actually split apart into the big crack. Now, only one of them was actually thinner than the rest of the laminate pieces, so I probably could have just cut one out, but frankly, I didn't trust either of them, so ripped them out. We're going to get two replacement pieces. Now, I've got this chunk of poplar here that I bought for another project. It's about the right thickness and it's definitely the right length, so if I can't get the replacement pieces out of this maple, I may very well cut it out of this poplar. I know that it's been kiln dried and I know it's in good condition, so hopefully if I put those in, it won't crack. Alright, I've got my 3 replacement pieces cut. 2 of them are from that new board of poplar, and 1 of them was recovered from the old maple frame. They're all 3/4 inches wide, but you can see the poplar ones are a little bit too thick for this application. So I'm going to start by flipping these guys sideways and taking a little meat off of them at the table saw, and then I'll get them to the finished thickness at the planer. Alright, so we got our 3 replacement pieces cut. I'm going to put 1 poplar in here, and then I'm going to put the maple and the other poplar in here. And this will just make sure that I don't have 2 poplars beside each other, because again, part of the thing I like about the laminate is all the different varieties of wood. Now, we could try and glue this all up in one shot, but I'm afraid that I might get buckling, particularly on these 2 pieces here where the surface isn't quite perfect. So I think what I'm going to do is discard that big piece for now, and we'll do this as a composite operation. We're going to do 1 pass gluing up just this part here, and then once we're happy with that, we can glue this part back to the other half of the table. And the goal of these clamps on the end here is to keep this thing flat and stop the pieces in the middle from going wavy on me. While these clamps here, crossways, they're going to actually press everything together and keep those glue joints tight. Okay, so today is next week, and thanks to the magic of editing, the entire tabletop has been assembled. Let's go ahead, take it out of the clamps, and see what it looks like. Okay, so it's out of the clamps, and it actually looks pretty good. The replacement pieces that I put in here have come together nicely. You need a little bit of planing and sanding just to get them smooth with the existing tabletop. The one thing that I am a little concerned about is you can see that the piece has taken on just a little bit of a curve along this edge here. That's probably due to the fact that I had it in clamps for a week while the glue cured. For now, what we need to do is just slice these sides square so that we've got a square piece again. Now, when I cut the tabletop to size, I want to make sure that I keep the corners square. That means that they're all 90 degrees to one another. The thing about a table saw, though, is that it's typically made for ripping wood to a certain width. It's not really made for cutting 90-degree angles. So in order to cut 90-degree angles, I use this homemade jig here. This is called a Crosscut Sled. There's more information about it in my table saw basics video. There's a link in the description if you haven't seen that one. Unfortunately, this Crosscut Sled is not actually big enough to accommodate the entire tabletop. So we're going to make it big enough by removing this back edge. With the rear fence of the Crosscut Sled removed, it can now accommodate the entire tabletop, which means that when we cut these spare pieces off the edge, we can also make sure that this side is perpendicular to this side. With the tabletop cut to size, the next step is to do a little bit of hand planing and sanding to smooth it out. So with the tabletop all flattened out, it's time to reassemble the mitered maple sides. When I cut the tabletop apart in the first place, I had no choice but to destroy 2 of those sides, so I'll have to create new ones. The other 2 sides can be repurposed. I think it might be time to get my blade sharpened. This is a homemade jig that we didn't discuss in the table saw basics video. It's a mitering jig, which is designed to cut perfect 45-degree angles so that you can put them together to form a mitered corner, or a 90-degree corner that's made up of 2 pieces whose faces meet at 45 degrees. The jig basically just consists of a piece of plywood, and there's another triangular piece of plywood on top here, and this front corner of that triangular piece is a perfect 90 degrees. Which means that if I take a piece of trim and position it along one of the edges of this triangle, then when I run it through the blade, I'm going to get a perfect 45-degree cut up here at the top. If I do that on both sides, then I'll have 2 pieces of trim that meet at a perfect angle. Let me show you how it works. Okay, so I've got some glue on this piece here, and I'm lining up the angle on the end so that it's about 135 degrees here. Basically, you've got this straight edge of the tabletop coming over, and then a perfect 45 up that way. And once that's in the right spot, I'm just going to fire a brad nail into it to secure it. So I've spun the tabletop around, and I've got another edge here that has its miters cut. So we'll just put a little glue on it. Same as the last one. And when we put this in a position, it's going to join up nice and tight with the miter that we just put on. And you see those 2 45-degree angles that we cut over on the table saw come together to form a very pretty little corner. Okay, cutting and fixing all those edges is kind of boring, so through the magic of editing, all the edges are on. Today is tomorrow, and I've had the tabletop sitting on the bench all night. Before I left it last night, I filled any cracks that I could see with some putty here that I'll sand off today, and I also clamped it to the bench in an effort to get the bend out of it that we saw yesterday. So after 3 coats of white bond poly and the sanding with 000 steel wool in between each coat, the end table surface is ready to go. I've reattached the tabletop to the frame, I can take it back inside and we'll once again have two end tables in our living room. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to hit that like button, and if you'd like to see more from me in the future, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to check out the videos that I mentioned that are linked down in the description. Oh, and if you want to know more about that mitering jig, check out Jay Bates' video on building it. I kind of stole his design and then changed it a little bit, but the video is still worth watching. I've linked it in the description as well. Finally, if you'd like to know what I'm doing in between videos, head over to Twitter and follow @ApprenticeMarks, or check out my website at apprenticemarks.com, where I post articles and pictures that go along with the videos. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a good one.